Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We're so happy that so many people are on board today. My name is Cynthia Rice. I'm Senior Policy Analyst at Advocates for Children of New Jersey, our state's largest multi-issue child advocacy organization. And we're joined by Beth Gardner, who is our colleague from the National Institute of Early Education Research, who is the Technical Assistance Specialist, as well as Tez Roro, who is a parent from West Orange with 2 children who played an instrumental role in bringing preschool to her community in West Orange. So we'd like to start our conversation today, but I just want to do some housekeeping rules. First of all, please put in the chat your name and the town in which you live, and how you found out about the webinar. That would be really helpful to us. And if you are listening and you have any questions, please don't put them in the chat, but in the question and answer, and we will get to them probably a little later, because so many of the questions we think that you have, we might cover, but we will make sure they're covered by the end of our hour together. Before we begin, not only I'd like to thank NEAR, but I also want to thank our partners who were instrumental in trying to get as many participants, parents and community residents throughout our state to participate today. Thank you to the New Jersey PTA, as well as our colleagues at the New Jersey Association of the Education of Young Children, and the League of Women Voters, who has really been instrumental, all of whom have been instrumental in moving this forward for today and the work that we have ahead of us in the next few months. So we're going to pull up the, I see that there, please remember to put your name, your town, and your, and how you heard about us in the chat, okay? Because I don't see too much going up in the chat. That would be really, really helpful, okay? So let's, thank you for pulling this up. And let's begin.
I'm sorry to interrupt. The chat is disabled apparently, so that's why people are not able to enter their names there.
Okay, so our communications guru, Catherine Falegi, is also on the call from ACNJ, and hopefully that she can work that out. So we've kind of laid the foundation, and let's. Catherine, I'm not sure if you're pulling up the PowerPoint, but that would be great if you can, and we can continue unless you need it to fix the chat.
Let me fix the chat really fast and I will.
Terrific. And thanks for letting me know, Beth. Again, as soon as the chat is up, please put your name. Can someone, okay. Let's check that out. I see a few names. Wonderful. I see me. So please put wonderful. I see some names coming up, and we apologize for the snafu. I see a few names. Please put your town and how you heard about this. That would be a really, really big help to us, because we want to make sure that we're communicating with as many people as many people as possible. Okay, so Catherine, if we can, let's get our PowerPoint up so that we can begin to talk. Okay, so Catherine, can you move on to the next one? Because, okay, great. So why exactly do we need preschool? Why is it so important? Well, we do know that so much of what happens to young children, particularly under the age of 5, there's so much going on in the development of their brain that deals with their intellect, their personality, their skills. And so much of that is developed long before they enter what we would call traditional public school or schooling, which would be, kindergarten and beyond. So when children are exposed to structured and very rich environments, they're like sponges. It's so important to their brain development. And they adapt to these environments very, very easily. So we know that the better the environment they're in, the higher quality, the better their development in all different not just educational, but social, emotional, that becomes a stronger foundation for them. We don't have to leave New Jersey to know how important preschool is. Through our state-funded preschool, which has been implemented since September of 1999 in our lowest income districts, we know that this program, the results of it show substantial reduction in grade retention, special education placements, children do better on assessments. So all of these are important things to explain just why preschool is so important, and not just any preschool, but high quality preschool that our state offers for a full day. Okay, for some reason it's not moving, Catherine, so I'm going to ask you to move it. Great. So what do we know about preschool in our state right now? Well, we have more than 200 school districts that are offering state-funded preschool. And we know that there's going to be more come next school year. Why do we know that? Right now, we're in budget season. Our state is trying to figure out how it's going to spend its money in the next fiscal year. And what that means is that there's going to be a lot of decisions made before June 30th. That's when this fiscal year ends. I can tell you that the governor has put in his proposed budget $109 million additional dollars to expand preschool. 40 million of that 109 million will go to new districts that are not currently implementing preschool, but want to do that in the future. And the rest of the money will go to existing programs to expand or to, to address, to stay in touch with what it really costs to provide high quality. That means our state is spending over $1 billion for preschool for 3 and 4-year-olds throughout our state. The great thing about our model, and it is a national model, is that preschool can be implemented through what we call a mixed delivery system. What does that look like? That means public preschool classrooms, childcare, and Head Start classrooms all can provide this the same level of quality because the standard is the same. So we often hear districts say, well, we don't have any room, but I want you to think about it. The earliest years of our state-funded preschool were in cities. So for example, where I'm located right now in Newark, or let's say Union City, the most densely populated city in our nation, they found a way to provide high quality preschool for their 3 and 4-year-olds by working collaboratively with the community programs. The district remains responsible for the program, but the classrooms are located outside the public schools. This is a very innovative way to make sure that we maximize the number of 3 and 4-year-olds who can benefit from high quality preschool. The funding becomes, once a district applies for it, and there we have eligible districts. We're going to talk a little bit about last year's list. It becomes part of a district's state aid. It is not a grant that you apply for every year. So once you've applied for the funding, if assuming you're an eligible district, then that becomes part of your state aid. Now, there are questions about, well, will the funding stop? Certainly we don't answer from one budget to the next, but think about it. It becomes part as of state aid, your K-12 aid. It becomes pre-K-12 aid. So it's a very different funding stream once it's connected with the broader education of a district. The list of eligible districts have varied only slightly from year to year. Why do we even have eligible districts? Well, until it's fully funded, districts have to apply for it. We're not completely fully funded. You think with $1 billion that would do it, but more funding is needed. The list can fluctuate a little bit, but for the most part, most districts have been on that list from the beginning. And what we're seeing is that now we need a different type of advocacy, because there's a whole list, which you're going to see, of districts that just haven't applied for it. Some of them keep thinking about, well, we don't have the room, and not thinking about how can we work collaboratively with our community. And others think it's a lot of work. So what we're trying to do, and this is why parents and individual town members become so important to encourage districts through advocacy to bring preschool to their communities. So I think I'm going to pass this on right now. Catherine, can you do that? To my colleague Beth. Yep. Thanks, Beth.
Thanks so much, Cynthia. And thanks to ACNJ for including NEAR in this effort. I have to start by saying I'm thrilled that so many of you were able to join us for today's session. Now, what I'm going to do this afternoon is give you a brief overview of the anticipated timeline for preschool expansion funding for the coming 22-23 school year. I would like to note the Department of Education has not yet released the application, which is called the Notice of Funding Opportunity to districts, but they have released guidance to districts in advance of the anticipated application. So while deadlines for the coming year have not yet been determined, we're going to do a brief walkthrough of what we expect might happen based on many years of previous experience. So as Cynthia mentioned, in February, the governor announced preschool expansion funding to include $40 million to expand into new districts. So while the state legislature will continue budget negotiations, we anticipate the budget will be approved on or about June 30th. Once the funding is approved, the Department of Education Division of Early Childhood Services releases a list of eligible districts to apply along with the application materials. And this typically happens during the first week of July and is followed very closely by a mandatory technical assistance meeting that is held, and for all districts that are interested in applying are required to attend the mandatory meeting. Based on previous year's experience, as I've said, we expect the applications will need to be completed by the district and submitted to the department on or about August 1st. And during August, what happens is applications are reviewed and scored by the division, and funding awards are announced on or about September 1st. Typically, the districts are then required to have classrooms up and running on or about October 1st. So it's a very challenging timeline, which is why we're encouraging districts and providers and families to be thinking about this now ahead of the application. Again, the funding and dates for the coming year have not yet been announced and are estimated here based on the previous year's application cycle. The next slide, please. As Cynthia mentioned here, this is a list of districts that were eligible to apply for preschool expansion funding last year. So in the last funding cycles, which were last July and in the fall, there were a couple of rounds of funding that went out. This is the list of districts. The lists do not change a lot year to year, but they do change some. So I will caution everyone that whether your district is on this list or not, it does not necessarily mean they will be eligible for the coming year. We anticipate most of the districts on this list would remain eligible. But as it hasn't been announced yet, we'll know more in the coming months. So in addition to the districts that are listed here, there are a group of partially state-funded districts. They're referred to as they're funded through ECFA and ELI funds. You probably know who you are already if there are any districts on the call. For example, I think we have maybe Lawrence Township on here as an ELI program. Has been eligible in previous years, so we expect those districts will remain the same. Once the new list of districts and applications have been released, if any of you are wondering, we're going to give you our contact information at the end of the presentation. And once we know more, you can always check back with us to see whether or not your district will be eligible for the coming school year. And as you'll hear when we talk about advocacy, especially by parents and community members, if your district is not yet on the list, now is a good time to become active and urge your township to become involved in preschool expansion. Cynthia, I'll pass it back to you.
Great, thank you. So, Catherine, can you move the slide? So what does local advocacy look like? And so we tried to break it down into formal and informal. Certainly for the formal part is, are you the only one who really wants it in your community? So getting talking to other parents, that can be done. That actually can be both informal and formal. How do your friends feel about this? How do your neighbors feel about this? You're going to hear how Tez was really creative in trying to engage other parents to be part of this advocacy work. So first, getting a feel for what's going on in our town. Is this something that's really wanted? This is a full day program, not a half day. It is a full day program that has to meet very high standards. You can also formally go to speak at a board meeting. I think this is a great idea. Sometimes board members may not be as familiar as let's say the superintendent is that that their district is eligible and the money is available, and having a parent come to say, or many parents come to say, this is something we want to bring to our community. Can you apply? Or frankly, why haven't you applied in the past? Also, you can schedule a meeting with the superintendent to say, this is what we, or what I would like. I think this is a good idea for our district to take advantage of this funding. Particularly, this seems to be an important piece of the current governor's agenda. And he's got 2 years left. So we want to make sure that districts who are interested actually take advantage of the money while it's available. You can also send a letter to the editor. Each of you has, a local newspaper, or even depending on where you're from, for example, in my area, I'm from Bergen County, certainly the Bergen Record or the Star Ledger, or even any local paper, your Suburban Newses, your Patch News, any of those, sending a letter in support of it. Our website has information, and maybe I'll save that to the end, but I do want to mention that we have a template for a letter to the editor for a parent or a town resident to modify so that it can be sent. And then there's informal. We all know people in our community. Are any of them board members, or any of them work in the district? So talking to people who are playing some role in the decision-making process, and that would be the school administrators as well as the school board. I used to be on a school board, and I had some of my longest meetings while in the local grocery store, because parents and community residents found this, an opportunity to talk informally with me and my role as a school board member. So they're just really just touching the surface of what you can do to begin to advocate in your own community. But I want to turn the webinar over to Tez Rora, who really, I can't stress this enough, played an instrumental role in making sure that West Orange preschoolers actually benefited, or could benefit now and will continue to benefit from state-funded preschool. So Tez, can you take over from here? And I know Tez is going to put up, Catherine, if you can take down, great, perfect, you read my mind.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me know if you're able to see my screen. Yes?
We can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. At first, I'll say thank you for showing up. That was the first step. Showing up is how I learned about this opportunity for my town, right? So at this point, ACNJ is sharing the live on Facebook. Please share it into your local groups, especially your local parents group. That's where this magic happened for us. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that on your personal pages, and just let people hear the message, right? I was following the chat, and there were different roles that showed up, which is really helpful, because you can see that it's going to take a bunch of stakeholders from different directions, not just parents, to make this happen, right? So as Cynthia mentioned, my name is Tez. I wear many hats, but in this capacity, I served as the president for the Council of PTAs in West Orange, and the advocacy work was done through there. I mentioned here, MBA realtor, because I am a full-time, I have a business, and I say that because everyone gets to show up and contribute in the way that works for them, right? So I was able to spearhead this along with my team. being a family person, I have 2 kids and having a business and all the different hats, so it can definitely be done. So let me tell you about the timeline of how this happened. So in October of 2019, NJPTA hosted a LegCon or legislative conference at their headquarters, and we met. To be honest with you, I think it was a rainy day, if I remember correctly. It was only a few of us that showed up, especially for us Northern New Jersey. It was quite a hike to drive, right? And Cynthia was the presenter there, and so she talked about this pre-K concept and that some districts qualified but had not applied, and I saw West Orange on my list, so right away it became personal and also curious. So how come we qualified but we have not applied, right? What does it take to apply? So that's where the light bulb moment happened. So I showed up, right? And so I learned something, and then I was just curious. So about a month later, in November of 2019, I had a conversation with one of my Board of Education members at the time, and I said, hey, let's talk over, a bite. I hear that we've qualified, but we have not applied. Is that something we can do? We had a really nice conversation, but honestly, the conversation ended with, Taz, we've tried, we don't have space. We barely have space for the kids right now from kindergarten to 12, much less add another cohort, and this money may go away. So the understanding was that it was a grant, which I'm glad that Cynthia mentioned, right? So anytime someone hears grant, it's something that may or may not be available next year. Then what are we going to do with these kids? So I went back to Cynthia and I said, so these are, the pushbacks that I'm hearing. So how are other towns, being able to do it? So she said, first of all, it's not a grant, right? So that's one myth that we have to clarify. It now becomes part of your school budget. And second, there's this public-private partnership. So you don't have to build a new school. It does not have to be in one location. You can actually partner with local providers. I said, okay. So I went back, with that in mind. Life, of course, right? Kids, business, all of that is happening. In March of 2020, we went to, unrelated to, the PTA, but still at least the pre-K work directly, but we went to Capitol Hill right on top of COVID, and, had talked to our legislators about all the things that are important to us. And, back then it was, free and reduced lunch, for everyone, because some people, and that's when food inequity, right, became obvious to us that perhaps was not, and infrastructure upgrades. A lot of our schools are old in New Jersey. All these directives that we had from National PTA, we were able to go to DC and talk. So that kind of kept like my, juice and kind of fire for advocacy going. And then, of course, we were all locked up, and all of a sudden, parents became teachers and had to, heads down, and small children. And then, does anybody remember what happened in January 2021? Particularly January 6th. Yeah, there was some madness happening in our nation. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to focus my energy on something positive, because there's not much I can do about this over here. And so that's how I tend to think, is when some trauma happens over here, okay, what else can I do to make kind of things or my life better, right? So I posted in my local moms group. I happen to live in West Orange. Hey, I heard that West Orange was a town that qualified for this pre-K and that we have not applied. Has anyone worked on this type of a project, maybe in other towns? And lo and behold, someone tagged a woman by Sue Dannemiller. So she was a local mom in West Orange, and she had helped bring this type of a program in another town. She said, yep, I've done this, happy to help. And so that became really, so when I speak about this pre-K project in West Orange, I say I have the fire and passion, and Sue had the expertise, right? She had done this in another district, so she knows the concerns, the blind spots that I may have from an education and delivery perspective. So we became a team. A month later, we held our first call. And so now this thread was getting hot. People were commenting, yes, I would love, full free day pre-K for my child. How do I help? I was getting messages saying, hey, I'm an assistant superintendent in another school district. I'm really busy. I can't do much, but whatever capacity I can help. I said, okay. So it became actually a lot to manage. So then I created a Google form. I said, listen, if you're interested in being part of this conversation, here's a Google form, let me know, your contact information and what capacity, you're able to help. So that's the thing about advocacy I learned is really honoring and respecting how people want to show up, right? Some people may be up for attending every meeting and following through with the tasks. Some people may just want to kind of hear what's happening and, maybe send an email to the Board of Education or speak, and that's all their capacity is, and that's fine. So that Google form started to grow. So when I myself and Sue held a call in February, I pretty much honestly shared the same content that Cynthia had shared with us back in October of 2019. I actually invited her to speak, just in case there were questions that the general population wanted to ask that I could not speak to or address. So she was kind enough to come in and address any questions that they had. And then the next step became clear. And as I'm talking here, if you have any questions, feel free to type it in the Q&A and we'll get to it. So the next step was to talk to the providers, because remember, space was an issue, right? So keep in mind of this picture, guys. There's a story behind this that I'll share with you a little bit later. So in April of 2021, a couple of months later, we held a meeting and we sent invitation to the local providers. So we had a list of the providers in town. And the other thing we learned too is, by the way, those local providers don't necessarily have to be in your town. They can be in surrounding towns. Oh, now the opportunity for space opens up even more, right? So the YMCA, there was someone in that chat, right, in the moms group who said, hey, there's a space in this room and we're expanding and that might be, available. So Sue helped me craft, she actually crafted the letter officially inviting the private providers to this call and saying that, hey, we're going to give information about this, what we're planning to do on an advocacy effort, and also the requirements in terms of what type of space, what the state requires, right? So that became really a launch pad for identifying data points. So we talked about curriculum. So this is really what I needed Sue the most, right? So because she had already gone through the process and she knew what the challenges were and what needs time to plan or to execute. So we developed a spreadsheet, which became really the working document that we shared with the district. I'll share with you a little bit later. So in there, we had a list of the private providers, who attended that initial meeting. And then we had the criteria, right? The space had to be this much, and bathroom and, play area, curriculum. What type of curriculum do you have now? Because that becomes one of the challenges to reconcile, right? So say that a private provider already has a curriculum, and then let's say they qualify to partner with the district to launch this program, there may have two curriculums to manage, right? Because the district has to have one curriculum that they're working off of. So we got an inventory of what curriculums they were working on. Do they have space right now that they would like to do this? Or there was even a provider who said, you know what, I don't have space now, but if this is a plan that the district is going to take on, I can buy a building with many rooms, right? And I believe that person ended up doing that so that I can partner with the district. So there was just so many, great conversations. I will say there were providers that came on and said, we think this is a great idea. We just don't think, it fits our model, and that's perfectly fine. At least we made sure that they were part of the initial conversation and they had a chance to hear about it. So that became really, a great launch pad, like I said, to really have all the data point in one spot. And through this, process, I would give the superintendent an update every step of the way of the conversation we were having, kind of action points and learnings from each of the meetings. I would also send out minutes to the committee, right? Whether they made it or not, we're all parents, we're living in the pandemic, we're busy. So if they didn't make the meeting, I kept them engaged with the development that was happening. And that was helpful because people would say, wow, this is hopeful, let me know what else I can do. I may not make the meeting, but I can send an email, or, Board of Education meetings were virtual then, right? Which made it accessible to a lot of us. So they would call, join the Zoom meetings and speak on this topic. So now we have emails going, people actually, being accessible to the Board of Education meetings and speaking out about that. So in May of 2021, there was an internal team assembled by the district. So remember, so far, all of the work that was happening was truly grassroots with the Council of PTAs, reaching out to providers, as a PTA capacity, but at some point, the district has to take this up, right, as a project and officially reach out and connect with these folks. So in May, an internal team was assembled and I was invited to be part of that. And we talked about a lot of the basic work that we've done and the foundation that we've laid. And so the district had decided to take that up. So remember, this is still the thick of COVID. So imagine what it takes for, in my opinion, during COVID, outside of the healthcare industry or profession, the education space was the most stressed, right? Our teachers and our educators and administrators were working the hardest they've ever had. And so for them to be open to take up this type of a project on top of everything else they had going on and focusing on getting our kids back to school, it had to be a pretty solid plan. And there had to be interest, strong interest and from the community, right? So I have here a note that every time, I felt like there was a challenge or, I was stuck, I would, reach out to Cynthia and her team and also Beth, right? And they were very helpful in kind of giving me some resources or strategic things. And one of the more helpful things to do was, to be honest with you, at this point, we, the PTA leaders, knew more about the process of, the pre-K than the administrators, quite honestly. And so one of the more helpful comments that I think Cynthia gave me was, hey, maybe, if we connect your superintendent with another superintendent, their peers in another district that has launched this project, they may be more open, to talk about. That was great, right? And so that's something we offer to say, hey, there's another, superintendent in another town that's open to having a conversation with you, so you can see what the launch pad looks like. We were hoping to have the application completed and classrooms open in 2021, but you can see that the internal group was just getting established in 2021. The initial application is pretty comprehensive. It talks about identifying places and partnerships and curriculums and hiring. There's a lot that goes behind it. And so in June, again, the committee calls continued, right? Updating the committee, the larger community. It was decided that they didn't have enough time or enough data to submit a comprehensive application at that time. We were a little, disappointed, but what happened was in September, the district adopted this goal of launching and working on pre-K as a district and board goal. So their Board of Education adopted it, the district adopted it, it was voted on, so it became official, right? So until here, it was really grassroots movement, social media, Board of Education, and people came to me when they had questions about the pre-K. There was nothing on the website. Here, things became a little bit more official, right? So remember, keep this image in your mind, okay? This is me. This is one of our Board of Education members. So then, March 2022, our then superintendent, who I was working with, left rather abruptly, I would say, and we had an interim super. I remember I was in a whole other continent when I heard the news, and I was like, oh boy. So a new interim superintendent came in. When she was, what's the word, inducted or signed on, I attended the Board of Education. I think that it was in person back then. I said, welcome, and this is the priority we've been working on. I'm going to ask you to keep it a priority. And I met with her, as the president for the Council of PTA, as I do with any of the superintendents we work with, to say, what work we've done in the past, where the district is, how important it is. And also, Cynthia and Beth kind of alluded to it, some of the outside forces that maybe a lot of people didn't know about is, as you know, with state and government budgets, there's budgets for certain things, but sometimes those budgets don't trickle down to what they're supposed to be because there are differences in priorities or there's no implementation. So some helpful information to share with the superintendents was, governor and election periods and things like that. And, the governor we had at the time, and so happens we still do, happens to have a priority for pre-K, and the budgets are, continuing. We don't know what's going to happen if there's a change in leadership. And so it's really important that West Orange gets in their application so that they can become, their launch, and then they just kind of add classrooms. So that was a helpful piece of information that added, a bit of sense of urgency of why now, why during COVID, right? Luckily, our new superintendent, the interim, was very open to it, and she talked with, this is Ebony, our assistant superintendent, who's really the lead for this on the internal piece, right? Talked with her and decided that this was a priority and focused on that, and their team has worked really hard to make things happen. So the application was submitted in July of 2022. The award came in September 8th. The ribbon cutting, which is this right here, happened on September 21st, and classroom opened on September 28th. So we have 20 days between grant awarded and classroom opening, and we know 20 days is nowhere near enough to order curriculum, supplies, hire, train, make changes to the spaces. So it might be obvious, but what we ended up doing is some of the partners who were open to work with us, particularly where you see us do the ribbon cutting here, is more of a community partner, not just sort of a private daycare. And they believed that we were going to get the grant, and they were willing to make some changes inside, even in advance of officially getting the grant. And that's what allowed us to act quickly, right? So that's the only way we were able to do this. So that buy-in was important. So the first year, 152 students were able to get registered. And some of the concerns, I know that, in the chat, we had people from, private providers and nonprofits and parents and all these things. So one of the things that Sue helped me kind of understand is concerns that private providers may have when a district opens this, right? So here's the thing. It's not going to be a good fit for everyone, right? So there were private providers we spoke to that said, hey, great, we just don't think it fits within our model, which is perfect. But there are others who really can benefit from this. And there's generally in the state of New Jersey, particularly, maybe the suburban area outside of New York, there's really a shortage of childcare. I mean, people are having to be on wait list, as soon as they're finding out they're pregnant, and it takes a couple of years to be on there. During COVID, some people had to pay for their full tuition, even though the school was closed, because if they dropped, then they would be at the back of the line. There is a shortage, right? And so we think with the mixed model, because districts don't really have the funds to even repair the older buildings we have, much less build a new one. We think there's a win-win strategy of partnering with privates, and there's not an immediate threat to private partners when this is launched, right? So the image that I asked you to watch, this one was myself and the Board of Education member who were so elated that we're literally playing on the seesaw here, where the pre-K kids were playing. So you can see sort of the joy on our faces when this is officially, happening, and there was sort of orientation of the parents that came in, right? So then November 2022, for year 2, plans were submitted to open up 200 more seats, and registration has already started happening in March. And so the first year, we have 7 elementary schools in our town. The way the district prioritized it was it prioritized 2 schools that were Title I. Right? So who needed it the most? And so that was also another way of making sure that, private providers didn't have concerns. So now it had opened up to, all levels for 200 seats, and we're hoping that next year it'll be even more. Currently, the advocacy continues because we want more seats, right? So that the plan is within 5 years to reach that, what's called a universal pre-K, or have a seat for every 3- and 4-year-old in town. So that everyone has the opportunity to, for early childhood. So we have a new superintendent. So this was an interim superintendent. We now have a temporary superintendent who actually happened to be a principal in one of our schools already. So the good news is he's already familiar with our district, and he understands how important it is. And I actually had a meeting with him yesterday. Our council meeting happened to be last night, and he understands this is a priority and he'll support it. But, part of the advocacy is making sure that when there's change in leadership, being in the loop with them and letting them know that this needs to continue to be a priority, right? So then, what helped us succeed? So that's the timeline, the general timeline of how things happened. So joining the PTA, right? So I'm sure we have some PTA leaders here, and our motto is PTA is beyond the bake sale. It's beyond the fundraising. Those are all the important activities to support our children's educational experience. However, PTA is first and foremost a child advocacy organization. So when we join the PTA, it really helps us be in front of these issues that we advocate for on a state and national level. So if I was not a PTA parent and invested time to go to this LegCon on a rainy day over an hour, drive, I would not have heard about this thing, and that light bulb moment wouldn't have happened, right? So really joining the PTA, and by the way, the conventions that happen on a state level and probably at the national level as well, A, you don't necessarily have to be a PTA member, and B, you certainly don't have to be a PTA board to attend, right? So if you're interested in what work is happening and what advocacy projects we're advocating for, be part of the PTA. That's where it started for me. The next is taking action. So a lot of us, personally, professionally, this meeting that you're hearing right now, right? Please take small action, take some action, decide what action you're going to take. Don't just listen and say, wow, that was, inspirational, and just, drop it, do something with that. So for me, it was seeing West Orange on that list. And then, the small action I took was taking a meeting with the Board of Education to say, hey, how can we do this? Even though I didn't end up from that meeting saying, yes, we can do it, going back to Cynthia to say, hey, so this is what I'm hearing. How are other people doing it? So kind of taking small action and having a bit of relentless spirit to kind of see how things can happen. The grassroots movements, we've seen this in many areas, right? Social media is huge. You don't necessarily have to be savvy with social media. You can have teammates or other people who can help you with that. I think just having the heart and the passion, and then just having the right people on the bus is important. So without Sue, I don't know that I could have done this because there were, again, a lot of blind spots that I had that she filled in for me. And so grassroots movements is great. And generally, I find that people are able to support a mission. They may not have the know-how or the time to start it, but they will support you. They'll show up on meetings. They'll, send emails and, speak at Board of Education meetings. Give them the tools. So one of the things that I would do when I sent those update meetings after each is I would say, here is the emails for the Board of Education members. Just make it super easy. This is, information that's available on the website. But again, this is COVID. We're all sort of dealing with a lot. So I'm just giving everybody everything they need. I may have even sent sample emails to send. Making it super easy to turn intention into action, right? So folks had an intention to take action, then I'm making it super easy for you to do that. So we talked about, it was important to give regular updates and next steps. I kept the district consistently updated. And the reason for that is, advocacy, I find healthy advocacy, effective advocacy is a balance of accountability, right? Holding the district accountable for, hey, we're doing this work. What are you doing with the information that I've provided you gently, right? So, hey, superintendent, just checking in, were you able to do that, meeting with superintendents? Let me know how I can help. Versus giving them the tools, right? So I find that, especially it's easy to be a keyword warrior on social media, right? So sometimes, some of us complain about our taxes, or why don't we have that? This other town has pre-K, but we don't. It's easy to sit and complain, but I think being part of an effective advocate is being part of the solution, right? And we don't have to have all the skills, but having the passion and being able to do something about that. So it's that fine balance of, I'm going to advocate for kids in our community. I'm also going to hold the district accountable. And it's easy to do that when you provide solutions. The benefit, I think we all know the benefit. Early childhood education, we know that when our kids start school early, they tend to perform, better and stronger and can do well in life. Obviously, financial relief, right? Daycare is no joke. A good daycare in our area is on average about $1,500 per one child. And unfortunately, in the US, having children and having a family has become a financial decision. So that's the obvious part. And then opportunity for parents to work. Some of us, want to work outside of the home. And sometimes because daycare is so expensive, it doesn't make sense to work outside the home because we'd be working and then, paying for daycare. But this offers the opportunity to start a business or work outside, or better yet, volunteer, right? Maybe for the PTA or other boards or, passion projects. I personally think that when kids are able to go to school and maybe parents are able to do what they want during their time, whether it's work or contribute, it does impact the family power dynamics, creates for more healthy and balanced dynamics, and that may be more of the intangible benefits here, and maybe even help reduce, potential domestic violence and things like that. The social emotional benefits for kids, obviously, are COVID babies. A lot of my friends had COVID babies, and they had concerns about, communicating and, speech delays and all these things. Perhaps that could be, solved for if our kids could be with their peers earlier. And then, as a real estate professional, I'll tell you that, it certainly helps maintain and increase our property values, right? When our tax dollars are high in New Jersey, as they are, but we can get benefit of, childcare or early education, and we can save about $1,500 a month. What is that? Somebody do the math. It's like 30 something a year, perhaps. That then makes it worth a little bit more. And so I think at this point, perfectly aligned for Q&A for 15 minutes. So if you have any questions, we will check the Q&A. This is if you want to connect with me after we go through your Q&A and it's not answered, or you want me or Cynthia or Beth, want us to come and talk to, Board of Education members, or, talk to your PTA about what could be possible, especially if you saw your district on that list. Granted, it may update for next year. This is where you can find us. You can find our Council of PTA page here. You can get a feel for some of the work that we do. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can send me an email, and thank you. Thank you for listening. I hope this was helpful.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Tez. Tez is clearly, Tez was a leader. And can we go back to just our faces, Catherine? That would be great. Tez was clearly a leader and took extra steps. So we've got a lot of questions, and I want to see if we can cover as many as possible and still be able to be responsible and end at 1 o'clock. So a couple of things that have come up, and I want to talk about mixed delivery right away. There was a lot of questions about mixed delivery. It was really helpful. So one of the things that as a parent you might want to advocate for is to ensure that the maximum number of 3 and 4-year-olds have access to this program. We hear a lot about the preschool expansion districts having lotteries. What does that mean? That the demand for the program is greater than the supply. And let's be realistic. Very few districts have the space capacity to provide for all of the 3 and 4-year-olds. And so what does that mean? How do we know how many there are? We look at a district's first grade number and we multiply it by 2. And that means the first grade number kind of gives it a general idea about how many first graders there are. And why do we multiply by 2? It's because we're talking about 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. It's not a perfect science, but it gives a parent an idea about how many 3 and 4-year-olds in the program. If you have 500 3 and 4-year-olds and a district is opening up 3 classrooms, and this maximum size of the classroom of children is 15 children, with a teacher certified, a bachelor's degree and certified in early learning, and an aide. Just think about that. That's 45 kids out of the 500. Parents making that demand and advocating for working with the community is critically important. Secondly, I think one of the things that worked really well for Tez is that she did some of the district legwork, and that meant she went out and looked for providers. That is, that I think was critically important. The superintendents have, and I'm not minimizing their work. They've got a lot on their plates. She came to them with a lot of that information already done. Beth and I have done a lot of work with school districts over the years. And when you think about, they may not know, some do, some don't. So where do you begin to look for providers? It's much more than the ones they pass as they go to their office. And Tez brought up a great point about a district can look outside their own community for providers. So for example, in Trenton, which actually has only providers, if I'm not mistaken, they not only work with programs, childcare programs in Trenton, but they go to the surrounding districts and use classrooms or collaborate with programs in neighboring communities. So that can be done as well. But Tez did a lot of the legwork. I also want to mention that I think there's some providers on, and there's an issue around equity. The issue, ultimately, the district is responsible right now. A district does not is strongly recommended, but does not have to work with the community. So there's the issue of equity is right now in both law and policy is not does not extend to providers. NEAR and ACNJ work just as hard with providers to make sure that they're advocates for their programs, assuming that they can meet the standard. It's a high standard, everything from having teachers with BAs to the size of classrooms require, the requirement sizes of classrooms. So I think that there's a real issue about the volatility of childcare programs in communities. And that's why it's critically important that both providers as well as parents talk about how do we get to make sure that every 3 and 4-year-old has access, because we know most districts can't do it on their own. And supporting your community programs, parents, is just as important as talking about why you want public school to come, because you want every kid to have that benefit, not just, not just meaning that preschool expansion is based on the number of classrooms in a particular school districts that are available. Beth, I'm going to ask you if you have anything you think we should add to that.
Well, I would say, in terms of the mixed delivery system, I think that's why especially you and I, do all similar webinars to this one, to help providers understand how to do the same kind of advocacy that we're suggesting parents do. So you really do have to, providers do need to take the initiative. And, and on the other side, we are, as Cynthia said, it's part of our role to help districts understand the importance of collaborating and the importance of the mixed delivery system to maximize the number of children that are served and to shore up community providers. Because we are aware, certainly after many years of having done this, we are aware of the effects of preschool. The effects that sometime preschool expansion in school districts does impact, of course, private providers.
And I'll chime in with a couple questions that I see here. So the budget, how, does DOE fund 100% of the program? So there's a per pupil budget, right? And I believe it's 15 kids per classroom. And so depending on the space that the district has ready in partnership with the private providers, or if they happen to have some classrooms within the district, that's kind of how it works. Copy of slides, I'll refer to ACNJ team if the people will be getting the copy of the slides. Transportation, so it's the same thing as any other public school. So I believe there's a 2-mile radius of, when public school buses, if your district provides public school busing, then there's typically if you live outside of 2 miles or unless you're on a hazardous road. So the same principle as K through 12, that's what your district would follow. The employees become the district employees, not the state employees. So now your district becomes, if you had K to 12, now it becomes pre-K to 12. It just folds into your existing program.
But not the providers, not the providers.
Right, just that
Right.
program. Yeah.
Just if you have preschool teachers in the public schools, they are the employee of the district.
Yep.
If you
And provider teachers remain employees of the child care or Head Start program, and are intended to be paid a comparable salary to the school district salary scale. I just want to go back to the question about the per pupil. Tez, just picking up on what you said, because there is a specific question about the per pupil rates for a particular area or a provider. I will just say that per pupil rates change. They are county based. The district receives all of the funding. The district receives a different per pupil rate depending on whether it's an in-district classroom, a private provider classroom, or a Head Start classroom. Those rates have not been set. They will be put out in the notice of funding opportunity. We do know from last year's materials what the rates were for last year. And then once the district receives the funding for any provider Head Start program they're contracting with, they retain some portion of that per pupil funding to oversee the program. The bulk of it does go to the provider and in a per pupil rate, depending on how many the number of children or classrooms are contracting for.
Yeah, I see a question about how do we ensure providers of color are chosen for partnerships or at least have a seat to respond to our RFPs. So it's not, in my experience in West Orange, it's not really an RFP. You're not really competing based on price, right? So the budget comes from the state. I think, so now if you're a provider, now that you know about this, if you know where you're located, the district doesn't have this program, start to have a conversation with the district or parents if you have this space to say, I might be interested in this type of thing. So I find that as long as the private partner has the space and the curriculum, right, to support that, it's not really a competition, if that makes sense. It's not an RFP process.
I think the first big step is that the district has to want to work with childcare programs and Head Start. So that's the big one. And regardless of the program, the childcare Head Start programs have to meet the standards. And that's, so, you know, a couple of things. We keep talking about 15 children. There's got to be 15 children in a class. No, a maximum of 15. There has to be a teacher with a bachelor's degree, a P3 certificate, a preschool through third grade certificate, because, you know, young children learn very differently than older kids. And they have to be able to implement a research-based curriculum. Usually the one they work on is with the district, but on some situations, it's a little bit different. And they have to meet a facilities standard, which is 750 square feet of usable space. There's some wiggle room, but that's pretty much it. So any program who meets those qualifications or are willing to meet those qualifications should be getting in touch with their local district to say, if you're going to apply, we want to be partnering with you. And so that's key.
I wanted to say too, that if anyone on the call is interested in learning more about what the state requirements are for state-funded preschool, you can certainly reach out to us. I'll put my email address in the chat. We can send that information out to you separately. Because of the nature of this webinar, that's not something we covered today. And this was, you know, not primarily that. So, but we can certainly help if people are wondering what the requirements are.
And Cynthia, there's a question about, will there be expansion to include younger children, infant 6 to 3 years? I believe right now the focus is 3 and 4, and so even
this funding is specifically for 3 and 4-year-olds, and this is the model. Our state funded preschools based on the model. There are other opportunities for, you know, frankly, birth through 3 initiatives. Certainly, the governor's wife has been instrumental in supporting that specific age group. There's funding for facilities through Thriving by 3. There are lots of other things going on that support very young children, but this particular funding stream through the Department of Education is solely for 3 and 4-year-olds. There's a question about who do you reach out to. We talked a little bit about some of them. If you're a private provider and your district is already implementing preschool, you would likely begin either with the superintendent or the early childhood supervisor. So you would look on their website to see their names and send them information about your program and that you would like to work with the district. I see Jersey City. Jersey City has been implementing preschool since 1999. So they have a very established program. but I would reach out to the early childhood supervisor. I'm looking for any other questions?
Will the slideshow be sent out, the slide deck?
Yes, what we'll do is once the video is ready, we'll send everything out, and we'll send it to those who registered who didn't, for whatever reason didn't participate. We urge you to share this information with your friends and colleagues. Send them both the slide deck and the videos. And as we receive more information about what's happening first at the budget level, as well as as we get a better feel as how the state is going to move forward. Because remember, the budget is signed on June 30th. Then we know for sure the money is there, and then things are happening in the summer. And however, the conversations that can be going on, particularly if your district is on that list or is one of the districts, like we use Lawrence Township in Mercer County, that has been receiving some state aid, but not at the level of state-funded preschool, which is a full-day program. You should be talking to your members of the school board and school district right now. Again, I mentioned earlier the ACNJ website, which is acnj.org. If you go to the preschool page, and it's a drop down, you go to preschool and you can see that there's lots of information about a letter to your superintendent, about a letter to your local or regional newspaper. There's a roadmap for parents, for providers, for districts, all easy to access and to share. We're asking you to do all of those things to make a difference, to turn the curve, that more districts and more children, more importantly, more children are benefiting from what we know is a high quality preschool program. Okay. We're done. It's 1 o'clock. And if your superintendent is leaving, talk to other board members. Tez is a great example. It didn't happen overnight. It took a lot. It takes leadership and it takes tenacity. Don't give up with one letter or I'm sorry, there's no space. Tez was told that from the beginning. There's not enough space, and she did some legwork, and her parent partners did some legwork. They found options. You can do the same. Don't give up. And the most important thing is we're here to help. We want to make this successful in your community, just like you do. And we're willing to help. So thank you, everyone. If there are more questions, don't worry. Email us. You've got all 3 of our emails, and we'll be available. And we look forward to continued conversations to bring preschool to your community. Thank you.